It's the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. For more on the Seminoles, including Osceola's coverage from veteran Seminole insiders, message boards, Osceola virtual happy hours, and more, go to theosceola.com.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines podcast. My name is Patrick Burnham. I'm a football writer for the Osceola and host of this podcast. Joining me today are Jerry Cutts, the owner and publisher of the Osceola, Bob Ferrante, the Osceola's managing editor, and former FSU offensive lineman and Osceola football analyst Mark Salva. Guys, welcome back for our third episode.
Awesome.
Well, you know, the great thing about this episode is we are not going to spend as much time talking about off-the-field items as we did last week. We're back to the vast majority of on-field football talk. And, of course, the Seminoles did have their first ever scrimmage under head coach Mike Norvell, despite him being 8 months on campus. Obviously, a pandemic-shortened spring practice period in March had an adverse effect on him being able to implement what he wanted as far as offensive and defensive schemes into the system. But, Mark, we're going to talk about that a little bit later with you. But before we get into what we heard from the coaches and players following the scrimmage on Saturday, there were a couple of significant injuries coming out of that scrimmage on Saturday night. UCLA transfer tight end Jordan Wilson was lost for 2020 and will apply for a medical hardship for a 6 year of eligibility. He was expected to start or at least be in the two deep at the tight end position that has very little depth or experience, not depth, but experience. And we'll take a look at the tight end position player by player in a future podcast. And then also quarterback Chubba Purdy is expected to miss at least 6 weeks, possibly 8 after breaking his left collarbone in an injury that required surgery. And we will talk about how that injury impacts the quarterback competition a little bit later in this podcast. But first, Bob, I want to start with you. Obviously, we had a chance to sit down with the three coordinators after the scrimmage on Saturday night. And I just kind of wanted you to share what you learned and gleaned from what they said as they came out of their first ever scrimmage, which I'm sure that there was a part of the coaches that were just excited to actually get their kids out in game situation, no matter what they look like.
You know, for Coach Mike Norvell, for the 8 new assistants, I think their first time inside Doak Campbell Stadium with the lights on and the players on the field was really pretty special, and especially considering the long off season that we've had here with COVID. But I think the overall impression is the predictable one, right? It's that the defense is ahead of the offense. That's the way things seem to happen every time early on in preseason camp, and especially when you consider the talent that the defense has up front and in the secondary. So, you know, not surprised to hear the coaches rave about players like Josh Kando at defensive end, Travis Jay at free safety. I think on offense, we've heard mixed reviews about the offensive line, some good things, some definite areas where they need to improve. The one position group, Pat, we've heard consistently is running backs are really impressive, and they've got a lot of varying skill sets there. So Jay-Sean Corbin, it sounds like, is one of those guys you can probably count on, and the rest of them are people who will fit in somewhere.
Jerry, kind of your takeaway from what you've heard from the coaches, and obviously any source that you might have that was at the scrimmage.
Yeah, at the scrimmage, I mean, I heard rave reviews about the defense. They had a very good scrimmage and looked to be linebacker position. They seem to, we look like we used to at linebacker. And then the other thing that I had heard was that the punter, Mastromano, was super impressive. I had a person from the 90s tell me that when he heard it before he saw it. And he heard the shoe leather hit pigskin, and it was reminiscent of a Janikowski sound. The kid's got a big leg. From what I understand, he can hit it a very long way. He's been able to drop them inside the 40. He's got control inside the 10-yard line with his wedge shots. And then occasionally he sneaks out of there, and it's one of those rugby kicks that we're sort of been looking for. So one source told me that he might have been the most impressive player out there. And that's encouraging. That's encouraging to hear.
Well, he was very impressive in his press conference he had today after today's practice. And at a school that has a history of kickers that get the mental yips fairly regularly, it was good to hear. I mean, he handled himself, it seems very unfazed. And maybe it's just because he really doesn't know where he is. Maybe he doesn't understand all the history that goes around with Florida State and college football, just being from Australia. But when he talked with the press today, and Bob listened to it at the same time I did, the kid was unflappable, relaxed. Seems like he's here and ready for the moment. But Bob, what was your takeaway from Alex's press conference today?
I think he's enjoying, his first real experiences of American football. I mean, this is a guy that hasn't been to a college football game. Let's think about the craziness of just that statement. His first real game that he'll be playing in is the first one he's ever watched or been to in person. But I don't think he's going to be fazed by the moment. I think he enjoyed the opportunity to kick in front of his teammates and to show what he can do. And I'm still not clear if he's going to be a rugby style kicker or if they're going to try him traditional punter, but I think a guy that you feel like can bail out the offense when things aren't working right and sets up your defense pretty well with a long field to defend.
So Pat, I was sharing what I had heard with Mickey Andrews, and the only question he had is can he get it out of there on time? And he had no problems with that in the scrimmage, so that was good to hear.
Yeah, we asked him today if the intensity level ratcheted up being in a scrimmage situation compared to going through live kicking on the practice field, and he said maybe a little. Being under the lights was a little bit different, but as far as the adjustment, he feels like he handled it fine. And as far as not being nervous with the added pressure of people coming at you in a live scrimmage situation, but If he's as good punting the ball as he does at a press conference, FSU's in good shape for the next 4 years. There's no doubt about that. Mark, what was your kind of takeaway from what you read from the coaches?
Yeah, everything was sounded pretty positive. Just kind of reinforcing what we've been hearing and reading about throughout the previous practices. It seems like the same guys' names keep popping up. The running backs, like Bob said, a couple of the DBs, that the linebacker group is looking good. Offensive line getting better, which is a positive. So the little clips and things that we can see on YouTube and whatnot, we look like a football team in spring practice, and that's basically what we got.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway was, and I still had to weigh both of these quotes to figure out whether I was going to move forward with a positive mindset. But Coach Dillingham had come out and said that the offensive line specifically has made great strides since only 11 days of practice in this new offense. So obviously I took that as, that, listen, may not be where we want to be. And he has said that the offense as a whole still has a long way to go. And I'm sure that's indicative of what's going on the offensive line. And then, of course, Coach Fuller came out and had a comment about that the offensive line was doing a nice job of playing in unison, which is not really a ringing endorsement because it means 5 guys are playing together. But the more time I've had to think about that comment and look back to last year, we saw a lot of times last year where the offensive line was not playing in unison, particularly as it came to blitz pickups and pass protection. So, this preseason, the glass is half full, and I'm not the most overly optimistic person in the world, but I think that there were some very good things coming out of this. And obviously, again, I don't think I can stress enough, it was the first time these guys have ever been in a scrimmage environment with this coaching staff. They did not have 15 days to implement their offense or defensive system. So I'm sure there were some mistakes, and I would imagine moving forward for this football team that just like in the regular season, they will see vast improvement going into their second scrimmage, just like most coaches will say the biggest improvement you see on your football team is from week 1 to week 2, which I think is not always true, but it's a tried and true expression by football coaches. All right, so we'll have more updates from the next scrimmage next time we come on next week. I believe they're going to scrimmage again this weekend, but we'll certainly follow up on that. Of course, there were a couple of things that have transpired since that scrimmage. And, Mark, I kind of want to get with you on this. Warren Thompson, a wide receiver, who took issue with some of the information he was not getting from the athletic department as it related to COVID-19, released a statement on, I believe, Monday night where he apologized for some of the things that he said in his statement and made it known that he certainly wanted to move forward. The next morning, Mike Norvell came out and said that he loved Warren and was looking forward to moving forward with Warren as part of the football team. You have been in staff meetings and dealt with off-the-field issues, or saw them as a player and obviously as a coach in the staff room at Florida State and South Carolina. Why do you think this played out this way? How do Mike Norvell and Warren Thompson move forward? And because of the gravity of what his comments could have had, not only on his team but on his conference, what will the ripple effects be like with his teammates? And I know it's a long question. Does the fact that the ACC is still moving forward with its plans for a season, does that help him with any potential animosity internally within that locker room?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So, in a situation with Warren, I think it's pretty obvious you're dealing with maybe an emotionally immature young man, right? There's a lot of lessons to be learned here. And I think, as a coach, of course, the cynical person to me is going to say, well, the number of chances you get is directly proportional to your 40 time, right? I mean, some people would say that, and that the cynical person would, and that there's some truth to that. Jimmy Johnson's famous for having said, why Michael Irvin was able to endure some of the things he did. He says, well, because the guy runs 4.4 and he's a great player. There is some truth to that. But the bigger thing is that you have, a young man who's he's been a 5-star, 4-star all his life. He's, maybe a little bit emotionally immature. If I'm Coach Norvell and Ron Dugans, I said, this is a teachable moment for this kid. You don't go and put your whole team and your whole program on blast on social media. Teach him how to handle these things. If he has he has a conflict or he has a question, you go to the person first. You go to Coach Norvell. You go to your position coach first. Let's talk it through if you're not satisfied with that resolution, whatever. So there's that part of it, an opportunity to help grow this kid and maybe give him some kind of life skills, because you go out in the real world and start doing this stuff. There's consequences to that. You got to forget we're an educational institution first and foremost. These are life lessons these kids are learning. That's one thing. The other thing is, the leadership on the team, how they handle it. I would hope that guys like Marvin Wilson and James Blackman and some of the leadership on the team would go to him and just talk to him and say, hey man, are you in or are you not in? And if he was truly, repentant and regretful for what he did, then, you get to measure that and say, what, we offer grace here. Obviously, if this emerges into a consistent pattern of behavior, then you got to deal with it appropriately. And the other part is too, as a teammate, you look at it and you go, this guy can really help us. We're not going to cut our nose to spite our face. And this guy's worth saving, for a lot of reasons, but not the least of which is he's a very talented young man that can help this football team. And when guys know that, they're probably a little more forgiving, probably a little more, what, I'm going to try to help mentor this guy, or, we're going to bring him along. And there's all those kinds of situations. So that is part of growing a culture, part of growing a football team, part of growing and developing leadership, and part of winning trust from the coaching staff perspective. That, hey, I can make a mistake deal with it the right way, do my my penance, and it's okay, because there's got to be accountability too. So all of that.
Jerry, I know you had some thoughts on this when we talked about it before the podcast. What are your thoughts on this? You're muted. There you go.
Yeah. I've got a couple thoughts on it. One, I'm drawn back to Coach Bowden as I think of this. And Coach Bowden, when, he kicked Peter, Lavernius Coles off the team, and he kicked Randy Moss off the team. So he was no stranger to having to discipline people. But he would always say to the media when they wanted what Bobby called them human sacrifices. Anytime that, the media was pushing to fire a kid, Bobby would always say, if he were your son, how would you have me handle this? And I think that speaks to one of the points Mark makes about, we serve a forgiving Lord, and sometimes grace is important. And so I'm sure they had meetings on it and talked to team leaders, and, were very considered in it. I also laughed when Mark was talking about Michael Irvin, because I drew the short straw one day in the media pool and had to go ask Bobby Bowden about a double standard where Deion Sanders was given a pass, and another player who had done exactly the same thing was not. And so I go up to Coach Bowden's office and say, Coach, I got a tough question. He said, you ask it, I'll answer it. I said, you punish this player, but not Deion. How do you justify that to your team? And he said, I can't, Deion does. And that was all he said.
That's a pretty good answer.
And then he said, the players want Deion out there. It makes them better. They all know that. And so, that's the wisdom of coaching, and we'll see how this one turns out.
Bob, do you have any thoughts before we turn the page and close the book on FSU's version of War and Peace?
I still wish Warren Thompson had kept it in-house and had gone to Dugan's, Norvell, somebody in administration first, and hopefully he did. And this was him just being frustrated and popping off on social media. A social media ban has been a popular discussion. I think we should briefly address that. Players don't want it. This team clearly doesn't want it. They want the opportunity to speak out. And I think when you have the opportunity, you also have to filter yourself, and you also have to police yourself. These are very important things. We have to make sure, and I shouldn't say we, Florida State has to make sure that they have leaders that are policing that kind of thing, and making sure that you have a responsibility, because you're tweeting to not just your family and friends, but also media and fans. So I have to think that this might go past. Norvell has said that Warren Thompson's returned to practice. He's making some plays here and there. I don't think he was in the scrimmage Saturday night from the sound of things, but
no.
I think there probably was some chat over the weekend, and Warren returned, sounds like maybe on Monday, for example. So let's see how this plays out. I think Norvell probably figures he needs Warren Thompson. I think Warren Thompson figures he needs Norvell in Florida State too.
Yeah. To Bob's point, there's a concept, that if you go to Sunday school at all, that all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. And social media definitely is a part of our societies and the fabric of these kids trying to build a brand, especially, on the forefront of having the name, image, likes and stuff starting to come out. So you have to allow them to have their voice, but there also needs to be some learning and some coaching as to that exact concept. Just because it's permissible doesn't mean it's beneficial.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they're going to try to move forward with this, and I hope that they get it worked out. Now let's move back to some on the field stuff. In a segment we'll term the mentalist. Mike Norvell came off the practice field on Monday to meet with the press, and he was not in the greatest mood in the world. He said his defense had an outstanding day and, was pleased with their effort, but the offense really struggled to get anything done, and he thought that had to do more with mental toughness and dealing with pushing yourself through the physical nature of his practices and the intensity with which they ran. And he says his practices will always be tough and physical, and was disappointed more about the lack of effort coming off a day off. They did not practice on Sunday. Mark, he also stressed that some of this is a byproduct of not having a full spring practice period, and probably even just as importantly, a normal off-season conditioning program. It's probably important for every program to have spring practice, no matter where you are within your tenure of leading a program. But Mike Norvell and his staff were in a first year. You've been in that situation at the University of South Carolina. Tell us why it's so important, or what they missed because of not having the full 15 days of spring practice.
It's a huge disadvantage for us. So you go into spring practice, you've had the previous 2 or 3 months where the new coach has come in, he's laid down the rules, the law, you've done through your workouts, and he's trying to set a culture. And so he's been saying all these things. And to put them into practice and set the standard of performance in a football context is so critical. And the other thing is that in spring practice, there's no game for several months. You have, you can really concentrate on setting your culture and setting the standard and putting guys through tough situations. I remember at South Carolina, we would on one of these Saturday scrimmages in the spring, we kept the offensive line out there for, 40, 50 plays straight, and they were exhausted, making them just go through it and have to draw on strength. And because, the old set coaching saying is fatigue makes cowards of us all, but make them go through it. So when the season comes, you have something to draw back on, because the thing we're losing by doing this now and having to do this now is we got a game coming up in several short weeks, right? And
3.5, yeah.
3.5 weeks. And that, to push people to the brink of and put them in these tough situations, tough physical situations where they have to play, react, make decisions, do things under really, really tough conditions. Well, obviously the risk for injury is a lot higher. And you don't have that lead time going into we don't have that lead time going into the fall to be able to, we got to be really, really intentional about how we do that during this time. And so that puts us at a huge disadvantage. It's just because we're trying to change the culture, and he's trying to put tough practices. And look, you can't be good at football without practicing football. You have to block, you have to tackle, you have to compete on a daily basis. And that puts players at risk. It puts, it forces them to have to do these things. It's just hard in the context with a game in 3.5 weeks.
Jerry, do you have any thoughts on what Coach Norvell said about the mental toughness?
To Mark's point, you're also limited in nowadays. Mark, when you were here, we could go 2-a-days and you could be in pads pretty much for most of it. Now they only get X number of days. I think they can only have 2 scrimmages, and they're very limited. So, I agree with Mark. You're at a really severe disadvantage by not being able to do that stuff back in the spring.
That's why I think it's really, real quick, it's why it's, I forgot what I was going to say. Dadgummit.
Well, my one takeaway, and Jerry, you echoed this in an email, you and I, these teams, the great teams at Florida State, were built off tough physical practices. And, I think it's what we saw in the spring was a marked difference from what we'd seen in the previous year, 2019. And I do believe, like Coach Norvell, he's seen this work other places. And I do believe that Mark, you, and I, and Bob have seen this work right here in Tallahassee. So I was actually fired up to hear him say that, hey, these kids got to get used to this because it's just the norm for me. Mark, you had something to add?
Yeah. So with all the positive things we're hearing, about this team and, the things that are going on, I think we need to be really realistic in our expectation because of the limits that we've had in practicing and being able to do these tough physical practices that, we're not overnight going to become Florida State 99 or 93 or 87, whatever. We need to make sure that we, because of the limits that the NCAA has now and the situation we find ourselves in, that these things, it's going to take time. So just kind of temper that a little bit. That's all I was going to say.
That's the thing I want to say as well, Mark, is sometimes I think our listeners can get really excited by what we say. And you got to remember, this team has not been mentally tough in 6 years. And it's just going to take a little time. And like Pat said, I'm really glad to see Norvell challenging them on their mental toughness.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jerry. I think during the preseason, particularly when you haven't lost a ball game and you haven't seen anything negative, particularly because we haven't been to practice yet, you do there. I find some positivity and some comfort in the fact that, as I told you guys in the spring, this is what I'm used to seeing, and I think it will have a positive impact on the future of the program. And like I said, we don't know what's going to happen from a win-loss record this year, but I certainly think that we will see a improved football team regardless of whether the record's the same or not. All right, so now we want to move into our quarterback preview. And we were expecting a pretty good battle going into the fall camp. And, obviously, as we've said, Chubba's out 6 to 8 weeks. So it's essentially down to a three-man battle between James Blackman, who started most of the games last year for Florida State, Jordan Travis, and, of course, true freshman Tate Rodemaker. And, Bob, I'm going to start with you. What is your take on the quarterback situation as we know it today? And how do you think this may play out over the rest of camp?
I think Coach Norvell has done everything he can to build up James Blackman to the media and try and sell how good of a preseason camp he's had. And the big question is how different is he mentally, emotionally, mechanically? A lot of questions there. And frankly, we're not going to know really anything until we see him against Georgia Tech. And in fairness, he's probably going to be the starter. My only comment on the quarterback situation in general is understand that there's 4 of them in the room, and we're probably going to see all 4 of them at various points in this season. I don't feel like James Blackman is the answer on week 1 and week 7 and week 11. I think we will see these freshmen progress. Chubba Purdy's going to come back at some point. Tate is a coach's son. We're going to see a really, impressive competitor there. And Jordan Travis, we know what he can do running the ball. We just have to see what he can do throwing it. So the answer to Florida State's quarterback situation is all of the above. It's just a question of maybe who do you start?
Yeah. Now, Jerry, I know obviously you had some sources that gave you some information coming out of the scrimmage on the quarterbacks in general. Can you kind of just tell us what your take is, given what you know and have heard from the coaches?
Well, I think Rodemaker can make it a quarterback. He can make it a quarterback battle, Rodemaker. But the thing that I'm hearing, Patrick, is first of all, everybody wants James Blackman to be successful. I mean, he's a really good kid. He's going to be a successful human being in life, and we'd love for him to be the guy. What I'm hearing is he's still struggling a little bit with his reads, and the ball's not coming out as quickly as it needs to. Now, can they fix that in the short term? I don't know. I agree with Bob. He's your front runner, and somebody's got to go out there and beat him. Obviously, Purdy can't do that right now. Jordan Travis missed the scrimmage, so he's not making any ground on that. But Rodemaker did. And from what I have been told by people that saw the scrimmage and that know football, is he looks like a coach's son. He's making very quick decisions. The ball comes out right now. He's picking up blitzes, pointing them out to his linemen, and he just looks the part. And they tell me he can spin it. That I was a little concerned about his arm strength in the spring, but I've had people assure me that he's got plenty of juice. So they were very high on the performance he had, and thought that was somewhat understated by others.
Yeah, I think one of the things you saw on his high school film was he was a very quick decision maker. We actually wrote that up in our analysis of Tate when he committed. He makes very quick decisions. He's very and he played in a rhythm-oriented pass offense in high school where 3 steps, get rid of the ball, 5 steps, get rid of the ball, and that's exactly what Norvell wants in his offense. And you and Bob and I had this conversation, I believe it was either the second or third day in spring practice. You guys were a little bit concerned about his arm strength. Everything that we had seen on his tape in high school indicated that he could, get it into tight windows. Of course, now they're going to be tighter in college. I think that was my biggest question. But I think that what we're finding out now, particularly now that it's been from what your sources are telling you, I think that what we saw that day at spring practice was more of a stamina issue, and that he had never been asked to throw that many passes in a practice. And he was in day 2 or 3 of, those guys are constantly throwing the ball at the college level in practice. I think that was, I don't think it had as much to do with arm strength as it did endurance. And I think, and I believe, I truly believe the fact that he, and of course I'm biased here, I think the fact that he is a coach's son, but particularly that he played for his father at a high school where there would have been immense pressure on Tate if his father had not been the coach at Valdosta High School. But certainly with his father being the head coach and having to play under that kind of scrutiny, I'd never played for my father, but my brother did. I could not imagine what that was like. I mean, it had to be that experience will benefit him. Now, obviously, it's not going to be like it's going to the microscope at Florida State's only going to intensify. But I think that gives him a little bit of a heads up. And then I agree with you guys. I think it's James' job early on simply because he is used to the speed of the game. But I do think that obviously we've heard some great things about Jordan Travis from Coach Norvell about the fact that he seems to be throwing the ball with more accuracy. And, of course, I think there's a package for Jordan either way, particularly with the talent at running back. If you were to pair him with 2 running backs in a split backfield or offset backfield, certainly you've got some things you can do in the quarterback run game, speed option type stuff. So I think there's a package for him. And then, of course, I think it depends on how long the season goes and how the team is doing. If you're in the middle of a run to play in the ACC championship game, and I'm not saying Florida State's going to do that, I'm just throwing out hypotheticals, you probably continue to keep him off the field. But if you're 3-3 or 4-4 when he comes back, do you throw him in and you don't know if you're going to go to a bowl game or if it's going to, not going to be a high tier bowl game? Do you throw him in then? So I think where Florida State finds itself in its season will dictate what Chubba does. But certainly I agree with you guys. This is going to be could be some rotating in and out at quarterback. Mark, what are your take on the quarterback situation?
I think freshman quarterbacks, no matter how talented they are, look like freshman quarterbacks. Even the best ones, even when you look at, some of the leaders. I mean, Sam Howell started for North Carolina last year, and there were times that I saw him, he looked like a freshman quarterback. I think the great thing about our freshman quarterbacks is we have some older upperclassmen in front of them that gives them a chance to maybe not have that kind of pressure and gives them a little wiggle room in order to get their game straight and adjust to life as a college quarterback on a elite Power 5 program, right? So, James, of course, James makes the most sense because of his experience, and of course, James is also at risk because of his experience. It's a double-edged sword. So, to Jerry's point, how is he mentally? Is he contact shy? Who wouldn't be after what he's gone through the last several years? It'd be interesting to see how he ends up, adjusting to this offense. It would make the most sense that he would go into the beginning of the year as the guy, but cream rises to the top, and if these guys are the real deal, it'll emerge maybe sooner than later, maybe middle of the year, maybe later in the year. We'll see. I know this. I believe Coach Norvell will play the best player that gives you the best chance to win, and that's really what you have to do, and what you got to evaluate based on the talent you have in the room and the needs in the system that you have in place.
Bob, I have a question for you as it pertains to James specifically. Last year, we were told that there was division within the staff, that Willie was on totally opposite page than what Kendall was on, and it was not a productive working relationship inside that building, and one hand didn't know what the other was doing, essentially. Do you think that because what we believe is that Mike Norvell and Kenny Dillingham are in lockstep, does that, even if it's marginal, do you think we see improvement in James because of that?
I think so. I think the coaching staff being on the same page has got to be reflected in the quarterback's efficiency. The question becomes, does James Blackman, does he show he's a rhythm passer? And I'm not sure we've seen that, in his body of work in what, close to 2 full seasons as a starter. I think he gives you probably your best chance to beat Georgia Tech week 1, knowing what you've got, knowing your limitations, knowing your strengths. But I still would say at the end of the day, you have packages ready for Jordan Travis, or you have a plan to go to Tate Rodemaker if things are not going well.
Okay. All right, well, let's move to one position that we know should be a strength for Florida State this year, for a variety of reasons, and that is its defensive front four. Obviously, the interior of the defensive tackle and nose guard positions should be the strength of the front four. Obviously, there's some talent at defensive end. But let's first of all talk, and I'll let whoever wants to take this. I believe that the 4-3, move back to the 4-3 after experimenting with the 3-4 last year, is more conducive to what this group as a whole, the entire front four, does, and automatically makes this defense deeper. Anybody have any thoughts to add on going back to a 4-3?
Well, I agree with you, Pat. The skill set that we have in that room, or 2 rooms, I guess, if defensive ends and defensive tackles are more conducive. The system's more conducive to our personnel. Coach Bowden had a saying he used to always throw out there in preseason, that the team with the best defensive tackles usually wins. And that speaks to the fact that enables you to be able to control the line of scrimmage, especially defensively. That is just going to be such a huge strength for us, with those, especially those guys in the middle. It's with Marvin and Cooper. Listening to Odell, I read Odell's comments today, and it was really encouraging that that he said the scheme that we're playing really enables those guys. It really plays to their strengths, which is getting off the ball, using their hands, being physical, using their athletic ability, as opposed to just taking on blocks, swallowing up blocks so linebackers can go make plays. Well, that's never been us. Our down guys get hands on guys, shoot gaps, penetrate line of scrimmage, make plays in the backfield, and that's what these guys I think can do best. It is a strength, and it is. If I said you could pick one position where you can be, your best position, it would be defensive tackle for me.
Yeah, and they've got, obviously, as you mentioned, Marvin Wilson's coming back for his senior year, is expected to be not only FSU's best defensive lineman, but probably one of the best defensive linemen in the country. He is joined by two other returning starters from last year, Corey Durden and Robert Cooper. Now, obviously, only two of those three can start this year, so you've automatically got depth right there. Cooper has continued to lose weight, and Odell said today that it has made a significant difference in his development as a player, and he will be a junior this year. And then, of course, you also have transfer Fabian Lovett, who's got some high praise from Coach Norvell and from Odell today. And then, of course, you also have Jarrett Jackson, True Thompson, and Malcolm Ray. But Bob, what are your thoughts on the interior of that defensive line?
A big question is that the deepest position on the football team? And I think the answer is probably yes. I mean, you feel really good about what you're going to get from, your top dogs, as well as Robert Cooper, who's, going to be a backup, but you can certainly trust him. And then you've got a guy like Fabian Lovett, who I think you can probably plug in there as a backup and get some good reps out of him. So you have to feel like short term, you're in good shape. Long term, 2021 and beyond, you're still in pretty good shape. So I don't lose sleep over this position group. It's a luxury, I think, for this team to have going into the fall.
Yeah, and it sounds like, based on the comments we've heard, that a guy like Fabian Lovett is working not only at nose tackle, but also his three technique. And there's kind of going to be some interchangeable parts there with those guys. I think the only guy probably I think Robert Cooper is a true nose. I think some of the other guys, including Malcolm Ray, can probably play either position, although Malcolm's size at 6'2", 290 is a little bit more conducive to nose guard than it is defensive tackle. But I think it only not only does them moving back to a 4-3 make it deeper at those interior two positions. I think the fact that you saw Corey and Marvin line up in both three technique and nose last year, there going to be some interchangeable parts, which obviously if you've got guys that can play multiple positions, just makes you that much deeper. Jerry, your thoughts on the defensive tackle spot?
Yeah, I think I have a relevant thought here, actually. In talking to Mickey Andrews, he was with Marvin Wilson last spring or last fall, and Marvin was, just huge. And Mickey told him, he says, if you need to take 30 pounds off, and you'll be able to play at your top speed for 4 or 6 plays instead of 2. And so sure enough, Marvin took off 30 pounds, and as you've seen, his body is very much transformed. And so when you talk about depth, you can get depth right there. If Marvin Wilson can play twice as many plays as he could last year at full speed, then you've got depth. And Cooper did the same thing. I mean, he's lost like 30 or 40 pounds. And so we may get an extra play in a series out of him before he's coming out. So I think that only adds to our depth.
Yeah, I don't know that it helps add to the depth, but I go back to what Mark said. Now there are going to be guys that are coming off the ball trying to disrupt the line of scrimmage as opposed to taking on 2 blockers and, just holding point until they can shed that block and waiting for other. I think, obviously, it takes a toll on you when you're trying to, keep people off the linebackers. I mean, you're stressed a little bit more than in trying to hold people up than you are just getting upfield and running. So I think I am looking forward to seeing how Marvin and Corey particularly look in this new defense. Probably the defensive position that benefited most, or at least 2 guys that benefited most from the move back to the 4-3 were defensive ends Joshua Kando and Janarius Robinson. And, Mark, I know you have some thoughts on Kando and Jerry, Janarius Robinson, but I think those 2 guys were put in particularly tough spots last year, asking to play outside linebacker, out in space, out in coverage in a 3-4. And I'm sure that they'll still have some coverage responsibility from time to time, but not near as much as they did in this past season. I mean, they may but they're going to be off the edge players this year, guys. And Mark, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, you got, setting the edge is so important in the structure of a defense. And I think, especially in Kendo, you've got a guy, I told you this before, he reminds me of Kevin Carter. He reminds me, that body, that the physicalness of it. I mean, he may not be just a speed guy off the edge kind of guy, but he is he's a physical player. He can set the point. He's a smart player, and to your point, yeah, there'll be times when we'll have to peel on a back on a blitz or something like that. But that's okay. That's not where he's going to make his living,
right.
Obviously, And then you got Janarius, who I think is an athlete. Yeah, when I look at him, I think of guys like Reggie Freeman and just high motor guys that have just a lot of quicks about him. I mean, I think he's, I imagine he's probably going to be the weak side end, and Kendo's probably going to be the strong side end.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean that's what I would do, and I think you got some pretty elite guys in those positions. And then from what I understand, at least what we hear is that some young guys are making a splash. Like Fuller and Griffiths are making some splashes. So not only will we have, I think, two elite guys setting the edges, I think we got some depth there that could be really, really productive for us. And so again, you look at the total package of the defensive line, it's it'll make the rest of the defense go, and that's the exciting part of our team for sure.
Yeah, and I thought, to me, two guys that I thought were coming along in the early parts of spring were Quayshawn Fuller and Derek McClendon, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they continue to develop. But we've also heard some great things about Josh Griffiths. But Bob or Jared, do y'all want to add anything to the depth at that position or what we've heard this far through camp? We actually heard from Quayshawn today, who's a man of few words. This guy I'm looking forward to seeing play.
I've been a little surprised just to hear all the positive comments about Josh Griffin. I didn't know what to expect of him, but they tell me he plays big and that he's violent. And that's always good to hear from a freshman.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'll go jump on that bandwagon too. I was hearing obviously heard the same things that you've heard during the course of camp. And it seems like he is grown up a lot in a hurry, because I was not sure that he would be a part of the two deep or competing for playing time in the fall. And of course, it sounds like that he has put himself in the running to be in the top 5 or 6 man rotation based on what they've said. Bob, any thoughts on the defensive ends?
This position is just one where you have to develop some depth. I think you kind of feel like if J-Rob and Kendo can play in a 4-3, you're going to get out of them as pass rushers. I've seen Kendo at his best is a guy that can run to the sideline and will chase down a running back. I think he can play the run game very well. These were guys not suited for the 3-4 bottom line. We've all agreed to that. Now the question is, do you feel like Griffiths, Fuller, or some others can jump in there? Because you just got to have a deep rotation, and in the event of any injury, you got to have some backups ready to go too.
Yeah, I think they could. I think that top 4, Marvin, Corey, Janarius, and Joshua have a chance to be dominating. Now, I think with Janarius in particular, he came in as a highly regarded recruit, and everybody's still waiting for that dominant season. And I think he's more of I don't think it's a matter if can he, it's will he. I think he can, and I just think it's a matter of And listen, I think this is his. This is what they call the money season, right? He's a redshirt senior, so you're probably going to see his best football as he tries to prepare himself for the NFL draft. And, of course, we saw some impressive things out of Josh early on before he hurt his leg against Virginia and missed the rest of the season. And I think we all know what an in-shape Marvin Wilson and Corey Durden could do to the interior of an offensive line. I mean, they could literally dominate. And I do think that they are deeper than they were a year before and could really help the entire defense. I mean, obviously, I think the pass rush will be better with the 4-3 than it was in the 3-4, and that will help a young but talented secondary that struggled last year. So I'm trying to look at this from front to back, and Mark or Jerry or Bob, do y'all think the move back to a 4-3 and the way they're going to play in this defense, do you think that could help a secondary out that struggled last year?
Well, no question. I mean, the cliche is, I think with our athletes in the back end, we can cover anybody for 2 seconds, and hopefully quarterbacks won't have much longer than 2 seconds with this group.
Yeah, this is one of the things I'm curious to see is that 3-4 really didn't suit our ends, Janarius and Kando in particular. And now that they're in a 4-3, which is what they came here to play, you may see a different, effort out of those guys because they're in something they feel suited to.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you get a big rush off the edge, it's got to help your secondary.
Yeah, and the secondary wasn't helped out, and we could get into this all day. They weren't helped out by the fact that Leonard Warner was playing on an outside linebacker in coverage when he should have been inside, and that Jaden Lars-Woodby was playing the inside linebacker when he should have been an outsider safety. But anyway, we could go on and on about the fact that they did not help the secondary's challenge last year by what they decided to do schematically and from a personnel standpoint. All right, guys, we're going to come back next week and do the offensive line, and I believe I said linebacker. So we'll preview the offensive line and linebackers next week. But now we're going to move into what I'm calling spirit or fear it. And I'm going to ask the guys a question, and if they spirit it means yes or they agree. It allows us not have to go into any long-winded answers. But if you want to answer or get into one of these subject matters a little bit further, let me know. We'll circle back to it. And, of course, fear it means you do not agree with the question or do not agree with how the question is leading. So I'll ask a question, and you need to spirit or fear it. All right, my first question, and I've listened to Reese Davis talk of this on college football. Nick Saban has been a proponent of this for quite some time. Should all Power 5 conferences move to a 10-game schedule moving forward with 2020 and beyond? Mark, spirit or fear it?
Spirit.
Bob?
I say fear it simply because I don't want 10 ACC games. I'd like to see a couple more versus the SEC and other Power 5s.
Jerry?
Fear it. Same reason as Bob said.
So you said spirit or fear it?
Fear it.
Fear it. All right, so I'm going spirit.
Yeah, I don't want a 10-game ACC schedule. I'd like to see some different people.
Oh, you would, because there's 14 teams, so you'd still have your – and I think they need to go to one division, but we'll get on that another day. In fact, I think what they need to do is go to where you play as many as 9 to 10 in your own conference, then rotate one opponent out of the other Power 5 conferences in and out. So and you don't play an FCS school, but that's for another day.
If you're playing 11 or 12 games, I mean, we'll still have our Florida game.
Yeah. So you get an SEC.
So you get an SEC, and then you do one of these kickoff classic kind of deals, something like that. Then you got a bowl game too, so you'll get plenty.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll come back. We'll get caught up on proper scheduling on another. That'll make for a great conversation. All right. Notre Dame suspending in-person classes for 2 weeks, and UNC canceling in-person classes for the fall semester. Is this a big concern as it pertains to the ACC moving forward with football or not? Who wants to spirit or fear it first?
They spirit. This is a big concern. North Carolina. It raised alarms for sure. Yeah, I'm deeply concerned. Spirit.
All right.
I would say spirit because I'm seeing it happen at colleges across the country.
Mark?
Spirit for all the reasons previously mentioned.
I'm going to go fear it because I think they're going to move at least through September 12th.
Fear. I'm sorry. I said spirit. I meant fear it. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out the game. I'm not that smart. I'm just a ball coach. Yeah.
Well, we'll get you built up. Spirit means you agree with the leading nature of the question. And by the way, if we lose power, it's because there's a tremendous thunderstorm going on in Tallahassee right now. And fear it means you don't agree with the leading nature of the question. All right. Will the Big Ten cave to the public pressure of the football players in its conference and their parents who were marching on the Big Ten offices at some point this week? Spirit or fear it, will the Big Ten cave to public pressure? Jerry, you get to go first.
Fear it.
So you do not think that they will
I do not think
cave. Okay. Bob?
I agree, fear it. I also saw on Twitter that the Big Ten president somehow did not take a vote on this, which just boggles my mind. How do you not take a yay or nay vote on something this significant?
Can I answer that question?
Sure. You muted yourself.
They had a vote, I'm sure, but they didn't record it as a vote.
Mark, spirit or fear it, the Big Ten will cave?
Fear it. They will not cave. I think with colleges canceling classes and whatnot, I think it probably they're probably going to hold to their guns.
All right, well, guys, I appreciate y'all joining me for our first edition of Spirit and Fear It and our third episode of Seminole Sidelines, and we'll be back next week. If you're not an Osceola subscriber, please go to theosceola.com and check us out. And obviously, we do have some free content. The podcast is free. Most of our written football content is premium, so you will have to subscribe. But we do have a special where you can enter free 30 into the discount field code on the subscription page, and you'll get your first month for free. So we'd love for you to try us out as we head into college football season. But guys, thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to doing this next week.
See you next week.
This has been another edition of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. To subscribe to the Osceola, go to theosceola.com. Go Noles!